My granddaughter wouldn't touch her birthday cake. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong. Poppy had been asking for that cake since September. Chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, the same one she'd wanted every year since she turned 4. But there she sat at the head of the table, 7 years old, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the candles like they were something to be afraid of. Everyone else was singing. My daughter Rochelle, her husband Neil, my son-in-law's parents who'd driven up from Guelph for the weekend, a few of Poppy's school friends in paper crowns. The house was warm and loud the way birthday houses should be. I watched Poppy's face instead of the candles. She didn't blow them out until Rochelle nudged her shoulder. Even then, she didn't make a wish, I could tell. Her eyes were open. After cake, the other kids ran to the backyard. Poppy stayed behind, helping me stack the paper plates into the garbage bag. She'd always been a helper, my Poppy. But this felt different. This felt like she was looking for reasons not to go outside. I'm a retired school counselor. 31 years at 3 different elementary schools in the Waterloo region. I've sat across from a lot of children who looked the way Poppy looked that afternoon. That particular stillness. That particular way of being somewhere without quite being there. I asked her if she was feeling okay. She said yes. I asked if she was excited about grade 2 starting in the fall. She shrugged. I asked if she'd had fun at her friend Daisy's pool party the week before, and for just a second, the briefest flicker, something moved across her face. Not excitement. Something closer to relief that I'd named a place that wasn't here. Then Neil called her name from the back door, and I watched her body go rigid. She went. Of course she went. She was 7. But she walked out that door the way you walk into a doctor's office when you already know the news is bad. I told myself I was reading into things. 31 years of looking for signs can make you see them where they aren't. Neil was a good father. Attentive, patient, the kind of man who showed up to every school concert with a video camera and cried at the spring recital when Poppy played the triangle. Rochelle adored him. They'd been together since university, met in a geology lecture, got married in Allure on a September afternoon, so golden I kept the photo on my mantle. So I folded the garbage bag and put it outside, and I said nothing. That was in July. The thing that broke my silence happened in August, the Saturday before the long weekend. Rochelle had asked me to take Poppy for the day so she and Neil could do a deep clean of the house before his parents arrived again for the holiday. I picked Poppy up at 9 in the morning. She was already waiting on the front step with her backpack on. She talked more on the drive to my place than she had in months. Asked about my neighbor's dog. Asked if we could bake something. Asked if she could sleep over. That last one she said so casually I almost missed it. "Can I sleep over, Grandpa?" She was looking out the passenger window at the fields going by on Highway 7. "Sure," I said. "If your mom and dad say it's okay." She was quiet for a moment. "Can we ask later?" We baked banana muffins. We watched 2 episodes of that nature program she liked, the one with the sea turtles. We ate sandwiches outside and I let her feed crust to the birds. Around 3 in the afternoon she fell asleep on the couch, with her head on a throw pillow and her shoes still on, and she slept so deeply, so completely, that I sat in the armchair across from her and just watched her breathe. She looked peaceful in a way she hadn't looked awake all day. I called Rochelle and asked about the sleepover. There was a pause. She said she'd check with Neil. She called back 20 minutes later and said that was fine. They could use the extra time to finish the guest room. She sounded distracted. I didn't think anything of it. That evening, after supper, after another episode of Sea Turtles, after I'd helped Poppy brush her teeth and gotten her settled into the pull-out bed in the spare room, with the lamp shaped like a lighthouse that she'd picked out herself 3 Christmases ago, she asked me to sit with her for a while. I did. I sat on the edge of the bed and she lay on her back looking up at the ceiling. "Grandpa," she said, "do all daddies play the attic game?" I kept my voice even. Steady. "What's the attic game?" "It's when Daddy takes me upstairs at nighttime." She paused. "He says it's our special secret game and I'm not supposed to tell because it's for big kids and Mummy would feel left out." I felt the room shift around me. Not dramatically, not like in the movies. Just a quiet, terrible settling, like ice giving way slowly under weight you should have noticed sooner. I asked her as calmly as I could manage, "Does the attic game feel good or does it feel scary?" She thought about it. Her face was so serious. "Both," she said, "and then sometimes it hurts. And then, Daddy says it's normal to hurt at first." I told her she had done nothing wrong. I told her she was safe. I told her she was the bravest girl I knew for telling me, and that I was going to make sure the attic game never happened again. She asked if Daddy would be angry. I said that didn't matter. I said what mattered was her. She fell asleep holding my hand. I sat in that darkened room for a long time after her breathing slowed, not moving, not crying, because I had learned a long time ago how to hold myself together when a child needed me to be steady. You feel everything. You feel it in your chest like something collapsing inward, but you hold the outside still. I did not call Rochelle that night. Not because I was afraid, though I was afraid in a way I hadn't been afraid since the day the doctors told me about my wife's diagnosis. But because I knew that if I called Rochelle and said what Poppy had told me, and if Neil was there, whatever I set in motion would be immediate and uncontrolled, and Poppy was asleep in my spare room, and I needed her to stay safe for one more night while I figured out how to do this right. In the morning, I called a former colleague of mine. Her name is Dr. Renata Baumik. I need to stop. Names. I need to be careful. I called a former colleague. A woman I'd worked alongside for 11 years at my last school, now a child psychologist at a clinic in Kitchener. I won't use her name here. I asked her to meet me for coffee. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You need to report this today, not tomorrow." "Today, I know," I said. She walked me through what would happen. I would call the Children's Aid Society of Waterloo Region. They would take a report. They would coordinate with police. There would be a forensic interview with Poppy, conducted by trained specialists. Not me, not Rochelle, not anyone with an emotional stake. I was not to ask Poppy any more questions. I was not to tell Rochelle before the authorities were contacted, because if Rochelle told Neil, Neil would have time to prepare. That was the hardest instruction to follow. Rochelle was my daughter. Rochelle deserved to know. But my colleague was right. If I called Rochelle first and Rochelle confronted Neil, evidence could disappear. Poppy could be pressured to recant. The window that Poppy had cracked open by trusting me could slam shut. I made the call from my car in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons at 9:15 on a Sunday morning. The intake worker was a young man who spoke slowly and clearly and didn't react to what I said in a way that made me feel dramatic or wrong. He took down everything. He told me someone would be in touch within the day. Someone was. A child protection worker named, I'll just say her first name, Brenda, called me at noon. She asked me to bring Poppy to a family resource center in Cambridge the following morning for what she called a well-being assessment. She told me to tell Poppy only that we were going somewhere to talk to some people who were very good at listening. She told me not to bring Rochelle or Neil. The call I had to make next was the hardest call of my life. I called Rochelle and told her that Poppy and I were going to extend the sleepover one more night, that Poppy had asked to stay and I'd said yes, that I hoped that was all right. Rochelle laughed and said of course, she'd pack a bag. I could not tell my daughter what was happening. I could not tell her that her husband, the man she'd loved for 15 years, the man who cried at the spring recital, the man with the video camera, had been taking their 7-year-old daughter to the attic at nighttime. I sat in the Tim Hortons parking lot after I hung up and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, and I stayed like that for a while. Poppy was waiting for me in the coffee shop with a hot chocolate and a muffin she'd bought with the $5 I'd given her. She'd gotten one for me too. She pushed it across the table when I sat down. "You were out there for a long time, Grandpa." "I know, sweetheart. Sorry about that." She studied me the way children do when they're trying to decide whether to say something. Then she went back to her hot chocolate. That night she slept soundly again. I did not. The resource center looked like a daycare. Colorful walls, low tables, a corner with bins of Lego. The woman who conducted Poppy's assessment was young and matter-of-fact in the best possible way. The kind of calm that comes from doing something hard so many times you've learned to carry it without showing the weight. She took Poppy into a side room while I sat in a waiting area with a cup of bad coffee and a magazine I did not read. They were in there for an hour and 20 minutes. When Poppy came out, she looked tired but not distressed. She came and sat beside me and leaned her head against my arm. I asked if she was okay. She said the lady had really nice shoes. The worker asked to speak with me privately. She confirmed that Poppy's disclosure was consistent and credible, that the language and the detail were characteristic of a child describing something experienced rather than something told to them. She told me that police would be conducting their own investigation and that a warrant had been applied for. She told me that Neil would be asked to leave the family home while the investigation was underway and that Rochelle would be contacted today. I said I wanted to be the one to tell Rochelle. She considered it. Given my professional background and the relationship, she agreed, with the condition that a worker be present or immediately available by phone. I called Rochelle and asked her to come to my house. I said it was important. I said she should come alone. She arrived 20 minutes later. She walked in and looked at Poppy sitting on the couch watching television, and then looked at me, and I think she already knew, the way parents sometimes know, the way the body receives information before the mind is ready to process it. We went into the kitchen. I closed the door. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you say anything," I said. She sat down. Her hands were flat on the table. I told her everything Poppy had said, everything that had happened in the last 24 hours, everything the resource center had told me. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she did speak, it was very quiet. She said, "How long has this been happening?" I don't know, I said. That's something they need to find out. She stood up from the table and opened the kitchen door and went to the couch and sat down next to Poppy and pulled her in close, just held her. Poppy let herself be held. Rochelle's face over the top of Poppy's head was something I will not try to describe. Some things resist description. Some grief is too specific and too private to name in words. The police executed a search warrant on their home that afternoon. Neil was arrested at his office at a financial services firm in Waterloo at 3 o'clock. The officers who conducted the search found materials in the attic. I will not say more than that, because Poppy will one day be older and I don't know who will read this. That confirmed the investigation was warranted and then some. The Crown prosecutor told me later, much later, that what they found suggested this had been going on since Poppy was 5. Since Poppy was 5. Rochelle took Poppy to stay with her cousin in Hamilton for 2 weeks. I think she needed to be somewhere that didn't hold the shape of the life she'd thought she had. Neil's parents called me once to say they were sorry, to say they hadn't known, to say they were cooperating with the investigation. I believed them. I still believe them. Some people carry no guilt that isn't their own. Neil's lawyers were the expensive kind. They challenged the warrant, challenged the forensic interview process, challenged the chain of evidence. There were months of pretrial motions that I tried to follow without understanding most of them. What I understood was this, that Poppy would have to testify, and that testifying would be the hardest thing a 7-year-old, who would be 8 by the time it happened and 9 by the time sentencing came, would ever be asked to do. Rochelle and I talked about it many times, whether to push for a plea deal, whether to try to spare Poppy the stand. In the end, it was Poppy's therapist, a gentle, precise woman she'd been seeing twice a week since September, who helped Poppy articulate what she wanted. Poppy wanted to tell a judge. Poppy wanted someone official to hear it from her own mouth. I cannot describe sitting in that courtroom while my granddaughter answered questions in her small, clear voice. I can tell you that she did not waver. I can tell you that the defense attorney's attempts to confuse her were unsuccessful in a way that made a few people in the gallery exhale audibly. I can tell you that when she was done and came back to sit beside me, she took my hand and squeezed it once, hard, and I squeezed back. Neil was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 22 years, with no possibility of parole for 15. The judge noted in her remarks that the premeditated nature of the abuse, the deliberate cultivation of secrecy with a child too young to have any framework for what was being done to her, and the breach of the most foundational trust a parent can hold warranted the maximum considered. Rochelle was present for sentencing. She had not been in the courtroom for most of the trial because her therapist had advised against it, and I had agreed with that advice. But she came for the final day. She sat 2 seats to my right, very still, very upright. When the sentence was read, she didn't react visibly. Afterward, in the hallway outside, she leaned against the wall and breathed for a long moment. Then she straightened up and said, "Okay." And that was all she said, and I think it contained everything. Poppy is 10 now. She goes to a new school in a different part of Kitchener. Rochelle relocated after the trial, bought a small semi-detached on a street with big maples, in a neighborhood where she knows her neighbors by name. Poppy has her own room painted the color she chose herself, a kind of dusty rose she saw in a magazine and tore the page out to show the paint store. She plays ringette in the winter. She has a best friend named something I'll keep to myself. She is, in the ways that matter, a child again. The nightmares took about a year to quiet down. They haven't disappeared entirely. Her therapist tells us that some of what Poppy experienced has been filed into parts of her brain that don't respond to logic or reassurance, that healing isn't linear and isn't complete, and that our job is not to pretend otherwise but to be steady and present when the hard nights come. We are steady. We are present. That's the job now. Rochelle is in therapy herself, has been since the beginning. She carries her own specific grief, the grief of loving someone who turned out to be something else entirely, the grief of time she can't reclaim, the grief of not knowing and then knowing and not being able to unknow. She's learning, she says, to not blame herself for the not knowing. That's slow work. She's doing it. I carry my own question. The question I come back to on the nights when sleep doesn't come easily, the question I suspect I'll never fully put down. The birthday party. Poppy stiff at the back door when Neil called her name. The birthday cake she didn't want. I saw it. I noted it. I told myself I was reading into things. If I had asked a different question that afternoon, if I had trusted my instincts sooner, if I had said something to Rochelle that night instead of folding the garbage bag and staying quiet. My colleague, the psychologist, tells me that I cannot carry that arithmetic, that the research is clear. Disclosures of this kind happen when the child finds a moment of safety, not when an adult asks the right question. Poppy told me when she was ready. She told me at the lighthouse lamp sleepover, not at the birthday party because that was when she was ready. And when she was ready, someone was there to hear her. I try to hold on to that. I try. What I know from 31 years of working with children and from what happened to my own granddaughter is this. The signs are often there. The stillness, the flinching, the relief at any reason to be somewhere other than home. The child who suddenly, inexplicably, seems to take up less space in the world than they used to. We are conditioned, those of us who love children, to assume the best of the adults in their lives. We are conditioned to doubt our own instincts when those instincts point at someone we trusted. That conditioning protects relationships. It also sometimes protects perpetrators. If you see something in a child that doesn't sit right, not proof, not certainty, just something, call Children's Aid. In Ontario and BC and every province you can make an anonymous report. You do not need evidence. You do not need to be sure. The job of deciding what happens next belongs to people trained to do exactly that. Your job is only to make the call. Poppy doesn't know I'm writing this. She knows that I've talked to other people about what happened to her, because her therapist and I discussed whether that was appropriate, and Poppy, when asked, said she didn't mind as long as I didn't use her real name. I haven't. I've called her Poppy here, which is what I called her when she was a baby, my little poppy seed, and which she would probably find embarrassing now that she's 10 and plays ringette and has opinions about paint colors. She called me last Tuesday out of nowhere, just to tell me about a sea turtle documentary she'd seen at school. The same kind we used to watch on the couch, the series with the loggerheads. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me that loggerhead turtles can navigate by sensing the Earth's magnetic field, that they travel thousands of kilometers and somehow find their way back to the exact beach where they were born. That's how they know where home is, she said. Yeah, I said, that's exactly it. She's finding her way back. Every day she's finding her way back.